Hello, on behalf of the Massachusetts Housing and Shelter Alliance, welcome to the webinar on scaling housing solutions for individuals experiencing homelessness through hotel conversions. My name is Joyce Tavon, Senior Director of Policy and Programs at MHSA, and I will be hosting today's discussion. I'm really pleased to announce that we are joined by several guests from Project Homekey in California, an initiative that has acquired and converted multiple hotels across the state into more than 6,000 units of permanent supportive housing. We're very interested in hearing about that work and its relevant lessons for Massachusetts. From the beginning of the pandemic, MHSA has been advocating for the use of hotels to depopulate shelters as non-congregate shelter, and more importantly, to create permanent housing. We have an opportunity now, as many of these properties become less economically viable to remain as hotels, to acquire and convert them to efficiency apartments for people experiencing homelessness. We have one such project taking place in the Commonwealth by Father Bills in Mainspring. FBMS has acquired a hotel in Brockton, which they've been using as non-congregate shelter, and are converting it to 69 units of permanent supportive housing. That's good news for Brockton. Our challenge, however, is getting beyond one project or even a few and seizing this moment to go big and to move fast with a statewide strategy to convert hotels to housing. That is why this discussion is so timely, and we are so fortunate to be joined by the California team that is doing just that. We'd originally organized this webinar as an informal conversation with Philip Mangano, but he has graciously recruited a whole team of speakers for us to learn from. Before I turn to Philip, let me share a little about his background. California's Governor Gavin Newsom named Philip Mangano to the Governor's Council of Regional Homeless Advisors, and Philip has been working throughout the state to advance this hotel model of housing creation. Philip was formerly the executive director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. But perhaps most important to us here in Massachusetts, he was the first executive director of MHSA. And many years ago, during my first tenure with MHSA, he was my colleague and boss. So Philip, thank you for being here today. And I'm going to turn things over to you to kick us off.
Well, first of all, Joyce, thank you so much for doing the hosting duties. I think most people in Massachusetts, and I know we have people from outside of Massachusetts on this call, but most people in Massachusetts know the great contributions you've made from your time working in Somerville as the Director of Homeless Services there, and in a variety of other positions. I'm really glad to see you there at MHSA. And of course, I'm looking forward to seeing Joe Finn, who is the Executive Director of MHSA, who's done a great job in terms of helping the rest of the nation understand how resources can be invested in the services necessary to support tenancies and the creation of housing. So I'm certainly happy to do that. Actually, this is a very good time, and the very people that you see on your screen were with me in San Bernardino just a couple of days ago when we welcomed the governor, of course, virtually. We're almost through with this nightmare of COVID, but not quite yet. But the Governor Gavin Newsom, joined us. And the reason why it's so important for these people to be invited, these folk that you're seeing, to be part of this initiative in terms of this webinar, is because they did all of the work. They are really the people on the ground who have made such a difference on this issue. They partnered with Jason Elliott, who is the governor's senior advisor on a number of different issues, but certainly on homelessness. And of course, the governor himself, who has made a substantial investment in hotel motel conversion, so substantial, as you know, that it was an idea that the federal government picked up. And as all of you know by now, in the Federal Recovery Act, specifically hotel motel conversion is called out. And the reason it's called out is that they know that in California, there was a proof of concept. Because in California, that first round of Homekey was cities of 100,000 and even some less, all the way up to the largest jurisdiction in our country, which of course is Los Angeles County, weighing in at something on the order of 11 million people. So from cities of 90,000 to the largest jurisdiction at 11 million, this concept has been tried across California. And what we're seeing is the kind of results that Joyce just alluded to. The projects are coming up. They follow what was called Homekey, which was a response to COVID in terms of getting as many folk who are homeless off the streets and into isolated situations where they would be protected in the large part from COVID. So Homekey has now given way, has evolved, I would say, to Homekey. And Homekey is the idea of creating permanent housing units for homeless people from those motel units. In Massachusetts, as you know, there's a long tradition of this kind of opportunism for homeless people. We recognized early on that a business approach which focuses on opportunism was critical. So when the diocese, the archdiocese in Massachusetts began closing nunneries and rectories and other church buildings, there were members of the Massachusetts Housing and Shelter Alliance, most specifically Jim Cuddy, who stepped up and began purchasing those and converting them into housing. When nursing homes went under, we stepped up, we bought those nursing homes and made them housing for homeless people. And the same is true. Joyce and I worked on an initiative when I was the director of homeless services in Cambridge and Joyce was in Somerville. We did an initiative with the YMCAs and YWCAs. We took advantage of their vacant rooms and the idea that they had never seen social services associated with any of the tendencies of people. They were more than eager to house homeless people as long as there were social services provided. So Massachusetts has a long tradition of this kind of opportunism in terms of increasing the number of units of housing, because we know in Massachusetts, in California, and literally everywhere across this country, if you talk to people on the ground, they'll tell you that the greatest impediment in getting the job done, getting the mission accomplished on homelessness is the provision of units. We don't have enough housing units. As a result of that, while we do have some, we move people out the back door of homelessness, but more people come in the front door than we're able to move out the back door. So we're left with the anomaly of bailing the leaking boat of homelessness. Get some people out, more people come in. That's frustrating to all of us who work on this, but it's very detrimental to the lives of homeless people. So our activity needs to be focused on increasing the number of units. And certainly as we've gotten more sophisticated in the services that we provide in terms of the vehicle of permanent supportive housing, we've gotten more sophisticated in terms of mental health services, more sophisticated in terms of trauma-informed care. Housing First has come onto the scene. Placing people in housing, we've now been able to remember that because we have the technologies to support them in that housing. So we've actually evolved to the place where we can now say, we know what to do and we know how to do it. So the issue in homelessness for individuals is actually simplified for policymakers, simplified for mayors and county executives, simplified even for us who have been on the front lines for years and years. The issue is scaling the number of units that are available to homeless people so that it's commensurate to the size of the need. That's our job, because that's the greatest impediment to getting it done. Needless to say, we'll also need to scale the services. We need to scale employment, the orphan in homelessness. But all of those scaling efforts are critical for the work that we're doing. So today, though, we're focused specifically on scaling housing units, creating, again, the number of units that are needed in our community, creating a trajectory to move beyond the bailing of homelessness. So what's the opportunity? In California and in most other places, there's a surfeit, an extra amount of hotel and motels. There were before COVID, but with COVID having hit, there are even greater opportunities in the conversion of hotels and motels. We've got motivated sellers, people who own hotels and motels who want to get out of that business, who haven't done well during the COVID. So they're motivated to get out. We have motivated and interested real estate agents and brokers who are eager to get those hotels and motels into somebody else's hands. We've got motivated developers who understand that not only do they have a call to this, as our friend Andy Meyers, who you see on your screen, has a call to it, but they also see an opportunity of being involved in something that will provide an ROI, a return on investment. And we encourage, in fact, any developers who get involved in hotel motel conversion to be thinking about an ROI. Nothing is more motivating for developers than an ROI. And in California, fortunately, we have entrepreneurial government. We have political will from the governor, basically all in on what he considers to be a signature initiative, namely Homekey. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to look at all of the component elements of making the deals and ensuring that they work for homeless people, beginning with those who are experiencing chronic homelessness, veterans, and other forms of homelessness among individuals. And what's key about this initiative is the creation of units that only are targeted to homeless people. We know through housing search and other endeavors, which we heartily ascribe to, that oftentimes you're out in the community looking to get the needle in the haystack, looking to get the units that might be available if you can talk a landlord into it. These units that we're talking about in terms of hotels and motels, only homeless people can live there. So it reverses the paradigm in terms of the housing search efforts that have been going on for years and years. Turns out there are 4 components to this effort. There's the acquisition of the hotels, the purchase of the units. And I've learned that you talk about that in terms of the cost per unit, the cost per door, the cost per key. All of them are the same, but you need to know that real estate lingo because you can get lost without knowing that. Then after the acquisition, there's the rehab. Oftentimes these hotel motel rooms are rooms that have had no capital investment for a number of years. They need to be upgraded, and the whole facility often needs to be upgraded. And most importantly, in order to create a studio unit that will attract a HUD subsidy if one is available, you need to have a unit that has not only a bathroom, which is a fixture in most hotel and motel units, but we need to drop in a kitchenette. So part of the rehab is not only the paint and bringing them up to code, but it's also making certain that there's a kitchenette in. And when you think about that setup, it's really starter housing for homeless people. This is starter housing. Our aspiration is that they go on to other housing, but this begins their journey. Some people won't leave this housing, but it will be better than them being in a shelter or languishing on the street. So acquisition, rehab, but then as you're all anticipating, of course, the next item is the rent. Where do we get the rent? Who pays the rent? Homeless people, as you know, are 0 to 15% of median income. We're not going to get a lot of rent from homeless people. So rent is a key item to make the whole thing work. And then importantly, what we've learned, certainly over the years, housing for very vulnerable and disabled people without services simply sets them up for failure. So the service component needs to be established. So we need to figure out where are those services coming from and who is going to provide those services and how do we pay for those services. Now in Massachusetts, I suppose that with the full waiver, the full Medicaid waiver, services are less of a headache than they are in California, where we don't have the full waiver. So we have something to learn from Massachusetts, or at least to convey governor to governor how important it is to have that full waiver. So we're not naive. We know we have things to learn as well. Thankfully today, I'm not presenting on all of those topics. Thankfully, we have experts, as I mentioned, experience in each of the elements. And ironically, the very experts who were there with the governor for the ribbon cutting on one of the first Homekey projects, they're going to all be with us today, starting with the provider, Tod Lipka of Step Up, in whose very apartment I am right now to relieve my own Luddite anxieties about being on this call. I'm over at Todd's, who has a this whole thing set up for me. You see the Golden Gate Bridge in the background, only to convey that I'm in California. We're actually in the beauty of Los Angeles. I think Tod's backdrop will indicate the beauty there. So Tod is the provider agency providing the services, but who's also been involved in hotel motel conversions for years. He's going to be kicking it off. And then secondly, Andy Meyers of Shangri-La Construction will be giving us the perspective of a developer. Why would a developer be involved in this? What's the motivation? How does it work? How are the hotel and motels found for the initiative? What's also important, especially in California, and I hope increasingly in Massachusetts, is local government. The money that the governor made available through Homestep was made available to local government. Local government then partnered with developers like Andy or providers like Tod, and that partnership is what led to fruition. So with us, we have Tom Hernandez, who is the director of the Office of Homeless Services in the county of San Bernardino. Now, in New England, for the most part, counties, they don't matter much. We're city oriented, but I think the principles that Tom will elucidate in terms of how local government is involved, how local government can be key in terms of provision of rent and services, that will be a very important part of it. And eventually later today, later this hour actually, we'll be joined by Jason Elliott, who is a senior advisor, who is the senior advisor on policy to Governor Newsom, and really the point person for Governor Newsom on the issue of homelessness, who knows all the details of how the Homekey rollout has happened. So each of these presenters will have a role, and they all function in different capacities. Some of them do multiple things, but each has been assigned a role for this conversation. Finally, hotel motel conversion is an opportunity. It's our opportunity. It's the greatest opportunity we have right now to scale units as rapidly as possible. And the mantra here in California on this initiative is faster, cheaper, and more units. Faster because these units come up online, as Andy will undoubtedly talk, much quicker than building from the ground up. Cheaper because hotel units, to acquire them and get them into to shape to be a room or studio, it's much cheaper than actually building from the ground up. And more because in California, we're also inaugurating a partnership between state government and private developers, so that in fact, the resources of private developers are going to supplement the resources of the state in Homekey, therefore letting us create more units. I'll embarrass Andy now by saying that at the meeting on Tuesday with Governor Newsom, Andy pledged from Shangri-La another $300 million to be targeted to a Homekey initiative. As a result of that, many more units will be created, and the governor pledged in what he calls his May revise. We're not familiar with that in Massachusetts, but a governor in California gets a chance to revise his budget in May. He promised that even more dollars will come from the budget surplus here in California for this initiative. So that's the background, that's the backdrop. You'll now hear from people who are making this happen. And we're going to begin with Tod Lipka, who again is the executive director and president of Step Up, who has done pre-COVID, did hotel motel conversions and is very much partnered with Andy Meyers. So I'm going to disappear now, and amazingly through technology, in my place, Tod Lipka, I hope.
I don't know, their technology is working quite right. Why don't we'll give it, there we
Oh,
go.
it's working fine.
All right,
It's
it's
working
working.
fine.
I dare to doubt. Sorry about that, Tod.
No fear.
Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Philip, and it's great to be with you, with Mahasa and everyone in Massachusetts. I'm a local boy. I grew up in Natick, and I remember my dad had a store on Boylston Street, and I used to go into Boston all the time. So, and visit Jack's Joke Shop back in the day. So my heart is there, Natick, but I've been in Los Angeles for the last 40 years. So I want to take you a little bit on our journey as a service provider slash housing developer. We started out in the 80s as a full-blown mental health agency, serving homeless individuals with serious and persistent mental illness. And we did our first permanent supportive housing project in 1994 in downtown Santa Monica. So we were early in the game in terms of saying housing is needed. I joined Step Up in 2001 and saw that really many of the people that we served had no access to housing. The affordable housing developers in the area didn't want a homeless person, let alone a homeless person with a serious mental illness. And landlords were stigmatizing the individuals we serve. So there's really no housing options. And we saw people are saying they want housing. So we decided we have to get into the housing business one way or the other. And I think that's a key. You may not have Governor Newsom and a state program funded for Homekey. You may not have an exemplary, unique investor like Andy, who's willing, a mission-based business, who's willing really to get into this and to scale, or a county executive like Tom Hernandez. But I think what's useful for you is our journey in terms of trying to solve this problem. And one thing I'll say is, as a nonprofit, you have to be focused on your mission. What is it you're trying to accomplish in the world? What's the outcome you're trying to achieve? Not on what you provide and what you offer. Because if you define yourself in terms of what you provide, you're stuck in that box. You're stuck in that silo of just continuing to do that. But if you define yourself in terms of what you're trying to achieve in the world, the change you're trying to achieve, the outcome, then all of a sudden you become versatile and say, well, what are the pathways to that outcome? And it may not be the straight pathway of what you're currently doing, but it may be innovation and thinking out of the box to get to that point. So as we started thinking about that, well, how do we create housing for those we serve? Well, we have to get into the housing development business. So that was a big milestone for us. My predecessor had done it, but we've been out of that for about 8 years. And I said in 2002, we're going to get back into the housing business because that's the only way we're going to create units for those that we serve. So we started on that pathway. And I got to tell you, this is why mental health oftentimes doesn't want to get into housing, because it's a complicated, sometimes dirty business that has nothing to do with mental health. And it's a whole new set of skills and language and complex relationships and financial deals. So I can understand why mental health agencies don't want to get into that. But we thought it was essential if we're going to create units for those that we serve. So we did our first project in Santa Monica. I did my first project, a 46-unit project. We did a few more projects in Santa Monica. And I have to tell you, at the time, it was just like, wow, these take 5 years to develop. And they cost hundreds of thousands of dollars per unit. They're very complicated deals. So we started to say, well, that's great, but maybe we don't just develop these ourselves. Maybe we look for partners to partner with us to do some of the heavy lifting. And that's how we met Andy in that process. And actually, my first project out of Santa Monica, I started to engage outside of the normal social service providers and to start to talk to developers and investors. And it was those conversations that led me to meet Andy. It was those conversations that led me to meet a philanthropist by the name of Eileen Getty of Getty Oil and Getty Museum. And actually with Eileen was my first initiative to say, can't we get units on faster than 5 years? And can't we get it on cheaper than costing in LA at that time, what was $400,000 per unit? It's just developers who are just solely developers are happy to live with that because that's the system. As a provider, we knew people may die on the streets in those 4 years. How do we speed up that process? We need to speed up that process. We're not content with 4 years because we got people waiting for that housing. So that was the first initiative with Eileen to say, maybe we can do this faster with a philanthropic investment on the front end for the acquisition. And then we use the government sources to fill in all the rest of the construction dollars and everything. And that had some benefits to it, but it also got as soon as we did the acquisition really quickly in about 60 days because Eileen fronted that money. But then the project slowed down because we got government financing on all the rest of the money. And that was the bottleneck. So it slowed everything down just to the normal 5 years. And in fact, that was during that time period, I met Andy, and actually Shangri-La did the rehab on that. That was actually near the famous corner of Hollywood and Vine, an old 1920s motel, a 36-unit project. And as Andy and I started to talk, we said, we want to get these on quicker than 5 years. This is insane. So we started to think about how to do that and realize what it really takes is the marrying of private investment, because we realized you got to take government out of the financing of the acquisition and rehab, because the government makes everything so much longer and makes everything so much more costly. And in LA right now, it takes 6 years on the development cycle and costs about 600 grand per unit. In this community with 60,000 people are homeless, that's an insane system. So the innovation, we were always thinking, how do we get to the outcome that we need is to get units online quicker and less expensively. And we realized that's through partnership with partnering with Andy and other private investors to say, could the private investor do the acquisition and rehab, underwrite that themselves? And maybe the voucher, we can make that pencil so that they do get that ROI that Philip was talking about. Because then you get a pathway, you get government out of making it more expensive and extending the time frame for it. So this was always part of that theme about thinking out of the box and going out, not just talking with service providers, because the conversation will never change because that's a certain world, but going out and finding out who are the investors in this world, who are interested in this space, and dialoguing with them to figure out a way to innovate. And then it just made so much sense. We had done a couple motel conversions before we met Andy. And it made so much sense. Well, motels, they're in the communities that the people we're serving are. They're communities unto themselves. There's no NIMBYism on a motel because oftentimes the local residents love that motel being taken out of circulation, because a lot of the motels we deal with rent by the hour, not the day, if you get what I mean. So they're not the best assets in a community. And you just convert the motel unit into a studio unit. And then you put staff right on site, and the staff just work with the tenants at about a 1 to 25 or 1 to 25 ratio. So they just made so much sense to get into turning these motels around. Well, you know what? It turns out there's no motels on the market. Every single motel deal we've done have been off-market deals, which means they're not advertised for sale. So that's, again, about getting out of what you normally think to see what's out there in the world and how do I solve that problem. We had to go out and talk with the motel owners and convince them to sell and dialogue with them about selling.
2 minutes.
So it was really about always keeping that outcome as our goal. How do you get units online faster? How do you do it less expensively? And how do you think about not just doing one project? Because when we did one project, you know, it will be life-saving help for 30, 60, 100 people, but it would take 5 or 6 years. And meanwhile, 5 or 10 times the number of people would need that service in that time frame it took to develop that project. So it was all about compressing that time frame and thinking futuristically about how do we get from where we are to where we want to go, and what are the resources that we need. And I can tell you, we always said that was not a internal conversation of service providers, but we have to get out of what we're comfortable in and dialogue with other partners. And, you know, honestly, there were failures along the way. And that's just part of what happens, to say, we're not always going to succeed, but it's about always trying to climb to that goal, about how to figure out how to bring in the resources that you need wherever they may exist to scale housing in a way that is beyond the current system of doing things, because that is completely broken. I can tell you that. It's a completely broken system. And with that, I will pass it now back to Philip. Another amazing feat of technology.
Todd, thank you so much. And I know the living is good down there in Los Angeles, but what Todd has done and what Step Up has done has been really a remarkable uh, effort, both doing scattered site housing for homeless people as well as the projects that they've done. We're really happy to be joined with one of Step Up's primary partners, but someone who's been doing construction and development for a long, long time out here in California. Some of you may remember him. If you go deep back in Patriots history, you might have seen this lineman lined up against some of our Patriot greats. Well, that was Andy Meyers playing with the Buffalo Bills. So that's forgivable, of course, in Massachusetts. But Andy's brought a lot of determination, energy, affinity to the effort. And he's also brought a lot of resource to the effort. So Andy, we're so glad that you're with us. 8 minutes of your best stuff, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you, everybody. So Shangri-La, my company, Shangri-La Industries, is a conglomerate of a number of different companies. We're a general contractor as well as a real estate developer, and we have a number of sub-trades as well, so we self-perform quite a bit of our work. About 10 years ago, and just as a sidebar, we typically had been building some of the larger projects in the city of Los Angeles, both as a developer as well as a general contractor. And so, you know, kind of household names like Ritz-Carlton's, and then some things more like that are more boutique, like Hotel Figueroa, which was a leading hotel of the world. All of these things were really geared for the high end. And in those pursuits of things, you learn how to do things more and more efficiently, because when you're finishing a higher end product, it's very, very budget constrained, let's put it that way. And so through that process, and about a decade ago, I was introduced to Tod Lipka at Step Up. And homelessness has always been a tremendous issue here, and I'm a native Californian. And the only time I didn't live in California is when I lived in New York for a short period of time, as Philip had mentioned. And I've always had a passion for people, for human beings. And so having my upbringing, I've always been focused on efficiency and how to do things differently or a better way. And so my very first experience with Step Up, they hired me to do a project which Todd mentioned, and I almost got fired because it was my very first affordable housing project, and I was absolutely refusing to do it the way that you have to do it when your project is funded with a tax credit and bond deal. And I just didn't understand it. I'm like, why do we have to do it this way? This is very wasteful. And so Todd and I, after he decided not to fire me, became pretty good friends. And we started to work together, and we said, look, the vision should be that we should approach affordable housing just like the private sector approaches any other apartment building or hotel. We need to design these things cost effectively. We need to be aggressive with the dollars and cents. And I just realized as I got deeper and deeper into affordable housing that so much of the waste is just based on pure inefficiency, both from a bureaucratic level as well as, you know, from on high. It's just written and codified. I mean, you get down to a closing call, there's 300 people. On the closing calls that we had for, you know, our 2 Homekey projects, where there was just, you know, I think maybe 2 or 3 people were on the phone. In fact, we closed without a phone call because we put in the money and then we brought in the lender, and we had a lot leading up to it. But, you know, we have Step Up and I have about 1,000 units together currently under construction. And the ones that we are doing the traditional way are somewhere between $600,000 and $700,000 a key and have taken about 5 years. And we have about 250 that are in the hopper that are taking less than 12 months, and they're under 200,000 a key. So the real key to all of this is we stick to what we know. So we bring the expertise in design, the implementation of the construction. And so we take that, we do the acquisition quickly, we do the design quickly. We don't wait to get a tax credit allocation to move forward with the design. So everything is happening as we close. And what made the project even more efficient is that we've done so many motel conversions, we know how to approach the projects. And so we were able to help, municipalities such as San Bernardino with, getting around some of the issues of the building code who haven't really converted a lot of these motels. So we got to maintain all of the HUD standards with ADA and safety, but we also have to help each other and partner with each other when something is new. And we've done this so many times. Let's make the learning curve very steep and quick. And so during this Homekey process, what really came to light is the vision that Tod and I had, many, many years ago. I've been working for 7 years. If the private sector can partner with the public sector and bring private capital, and the unique thing about us is we're not driving to a private equity return. We're driving to a yield based on our portfolio of properties. So we take all the risks. We sign the guarantees. We're responsible for the repayment. We have to make sure if there's a cost overrun, the cost overrun is no longer something that has to be dealt with in a council meeting or something else, or the housing authority. I have to pay for it. And so ultimately what we've done is we've taken all the risk and we've reduced the amount of compliance that is required and drives the cost, really sky high. So our pay applications flow very, very quickly. Our design review, one project has certified payroll, the other one does not. We have all the compliance in-house. We're used to doing it. So we have this very efficient machine. And through Homekey, we've developed a partnership with the county and city of San Bernardino, as well as the county of Monterey and Salinas. But in this particular case, we'll focus on San Bernardino. It took to do this, it's so new because honestly, the public sector loses a little bit of control. They don't have the control that they normally would, and that's a fact. But it's that control that is typically put upon a project that makes it really not efficient. And so we have begun to really build a rapport because, again, I say to you, we are driving to a yield, not a private equity return. We don't have investors, so we don't answer to an investment committee. So we can pick up the phone, we can talk to Tom Hernandez, and we get through these projects. So we closed, I believe we were awarded the Homekey subsidy kind of in October. We closed, I believe, on December 16th. We have 38 people housed, which was what we agreed to do. So we're doing an in-place renovation with about 50% occupancy, because that's about the most efficient. That's the biggest reduction in efficiency that we could take to make sure that the building was 100% converted to permanent supportive housing in a 12-month period. And I have to tell you,
1 minute, Andy, 1 minute.
Yeah,
1 minute.
The key to it though is the collaboration that we have with San Bernardino. So the building inspectors, the head of planning, building and safety, county super, everybody has really said, look, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do more and more of these. And so if we can continue to grow our public-private partnerships, whether they're here in California or in Massachusetts, the idea is we're going to try to deliver these units for less than 200,000, less than 300,000 a key in a very compressed time frame.
Thanks so much, Andy. And the good news for all of us, still having Massachusetts roots, is that Andy, Shangri-La, they're not geographically bound. So if there are projects in Massachusetts that might need an investor, I think you'd have some interest from Shangri-La. I think that's an accurate statement. So how do you make all of this happen at the local level? That's critical. The governor gave the money ultimately to local jurisdictions. They partnered with Andy, they partnered with Tod, but of course there are always some obstacles and impediments at the local level. So I'm really glad that my friend Tom Hernandez, who's done an extraordinary job in San Bernardino, but if we only had a Tom Hernandez in every city in the country, we'd be a lot further along on this issue of homelessness, I can assure you. So Tom, do you want to talk a little bit, we have limited time, but talk a little bit about your experience at the local level.
Yes, thank you, Philip. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. This was a very interesting experience because, as Philip said any type of development in California is a premium, and trying to identify housing is very important. The traditional, construction mode, 2 years, 3 years goes by before something finally gets built, is not necessarily conducive, especially because of the homeless crisis that we have here in California. And when you think San Bernardino County, everyone just says, what's San Bernardino County? Well, it's part of the Inland Empire, but we're the 15th largest county in the entire country in terms of population. So, and of course, we are the largest geographic county. So we have a lot of issues that we still need to deal with. But when the governor released these Homekey funds back in July of last year, with a due date of August, by the way, San Bernardino County and generally county cities, bureaucracy sometimes takes a little bit longer to do things. But I've always had a motto that if we can do it, let's try to make it possible. I think of ways we can do it, not of ways we can't do it. And so when given the opportunity, Philip had already introduced us to Shangri-La because we had a presentation by Andy regarding an opportunity that he had in the city of Colton that we were very interested in. But what it comes to is, you can build it, but you need to make sure that it is financially sound, meaning that the rent is connected to it in order to have these programs go into perpetuity and be funded. So we luckily had a very great relationship with Step Up as well. We partnered quickly because we had a high turnaround. We could not wait to discuss or anything. We had to hit the ground running. And the resources that Shangri-La and Step Up brought to the table were fantastic. The good thing about working with county government is we have the internal resources to do the grant writing. We have the internal resources to pull all of the information together to try to collect everything and keep track of that. And so that's primarily what our function was as the sponsor for it. The county itself is not in the business of owning motels or hotel conversions to apartments. We know that we don't have that expertise. That's why we need to partner with developers who will commit those rooms specifically to our homeless clientele. And by the way, this housing is totally different from affordable housing. Affordable housing is one thing, but this is housing directly for the homeless. And so when you talk about affordable housing, it has to be affordable housing, but for the homeless, the 0 to 15% that Philip talked about. And that sometimes is very difficult to get going. So what the county did is we had some resources from state funding, by the way, that we had available. We had the governor Governor Brown had issued out the California Emergency Solutions and Housing money, which we used some of that money because we could use it for 15 years of capitalized operating subsidies. And we also partnered it with homeless housing assistance and prevention funds, which were new money that the county received, to come together and sort of put together a $5 million commitment for the rental subsidies as well as the supportive services subsidies to the Homekey program. And that's where the county can come into. The county has resources. You can work with your local public health authority to get mainstream vouchers if they have any. With this project, we anticipated going in with what the county was going to bring in terms of resources. The governor connected us also with enterprise community partners through a grant from Kaiser Family Foundation that provided 2 years of rental subsidies and operating support for this project. And I believe 50% of that went to capitalized operating subsidies, and then the rest went to Step Up as a property manager for supportive services. When the county needs to do something, we can do it. And I found out, because normally this is a 2-year process, and we did it in a little over the 2 months to get things done. And so,
1 minute.
okay, all right. And so moving forward, it's possible. You can do this. If you make a commitment and you have your commitment all the way up to your board of supervisors, Cody Holmes from Shangri-La and I were working on Christmas Eve to make sure that we had documents to the state, and we had to get that signed by our chairman of the board in the evening, the Wednesday before. And so these type of commitments, and I just want to say before it ends, I have never worked with two organizations, a developer and a nonprofit provider, that have been so willing, so easy to work with. And I want to say, if you're going to do construction or rehabilitation activities such as this, you really, really need to find the right people and bring them to the table. That's how it works.
Confluence of personality, it always helps, Tom, in any kind of activity. So
that always helps.
Appreciate that local perspective. We've been joined by Jason Elliott, who is actually a senior advisor to Governor Newsom and who has been instrumental in moving forward the Homekey initiative. Jason, we've heard from the provider in terms of Step Up, Tod Lipka. We've heard from Andy Meyers, a developer's perspective. We've heard locally from Tom Hernandez. But you have 7 minutes to tell us about what it looks like from the governor's office. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Philip, and hey, everybody, and good afternoon to you. It's still morning for me for the next 12 minutes here in California. I want to be mindful of not repeating what our local partners have probably already told you during this conference, but I think I'll just say this, for those of you who are policymakers or implementers, the idea of Project Homekey, the non-congregate shelter leasing model, Project Homekey, and then Homekey, which is just acquisition and rehab. We did not invent non-congregate shelter. We did not invent acquisition and rehabilitation of affordable housing or housing for the homeless. We didn't invent those things. We took them to scale quickly, and we just put our head down and we ran 1,000,000 miles an hour through traditional brick walls that would otherwise stop us from doing those things. I would say that our role in Homekey and Homekey was putting a name on top of them, providing funding to the local governments, but really then having Tom and Andy and Todd and Philip and everybody's back when we asked them to run through walls. And we said, we're going to have your back. We're going to support you politically. We're going to waive CEQA, which is our version of like NEPA, like environmental laws. We waived land use controls. You know, the local governments can't do that in California, not legally, not politically, but we can. And it cost us some political capital, but it was worth it. So I think, you know, at the end of the day, what did we do? I would say we tilled the field for our local partners to be able to do what they do. And really being humble and mindful of the fact that I'm sitting over here in Sacramento. I didn't execute escrow on a single hotel. We provided $846 million to other people to do that. This is fundamentally a local state partnership. And in the case of Homekey round one, it was funded by the feds. But really, this is a local state partnership. And our job is to be supportive and to be cheerleaders and to have the backs of our local partners. So, you know, I think these Homekey and Homekey were fundamentally pandemic responses. And, you know, while we're still in the pandemic, we're emerging from it. And we all know, because we've just lived through it, a lot of the rules, the unwritten rules, or in some cases, the written rules that prevented us from treating homelessness like the crisis that it actually is, we got around those, or we stepped over them in a way that would not have been possible legally, politically, budgetarily, so forth, absent the pandemic. So it's a tired sort of cliche to say we found the silver lining or whatever, but I will just say Homekey, Homekey were born from the pandemic, but in doing those initiatives, we proved what I think all of us who work in homelessness kind of know in the back of our head, which is that if we could waive some of these land use barriers, if we could step around NIMBYism, and if we could actually treat homelessness like the crisis that we all say that it is. We all say it's a crisis, but then we don't actually do the things. And by the way, my boss deserves this criticism as well. We say it's a crisis, but then in the past, we haven't acted like it until this year. And I think, you know, I was talking to somebody else about this earlier today. I have never, most of us, unless you're, you know, significantly on in years and lived through the Spanish flu, none of us have ever really lived through a public health crisis before. SARS, Ebola, okay. But I mean, not at this level. So I think when we said we have to treat homelessness like a public health crisis, none of us actually knew what that felt like. But now we've lived through one, and we know what the feeling of, I cannot go to sleep. It's midnight, but I cannot go to sleep because if I don't work another hour, people are going to die, right? That's the feeling we all had during the pandemic. So how do you take that and manifest it and build it into your laws? And I think that's really what to the extent we added any value in Homekey and Homekey, I would say that's what it was. So, you know, I don't want to belabor this, and I know Philip wants to leave time for Q&A, and if I've learned anything, it's don't break Philip's rules. So I will just say I'm grateful to the local partners, not only that are represented on this call, but we had 94 Homekey projects, 6,000 units, 55 different jurisdictions that sponsored programs, and every single one of them stood up. And in some cases, it was relatively easy. And in some cases, these were deep, bloody political fights in their cities. And I will tell you, we had 95 projects and we lost one to NIMBY pushback. So we went 94 of 95, right? And to those 94 mayors, boards of supervisors, housing authorities, community-based organizations, and so forth, they're the heroes of Homekey Roomkey. So I often get asked to come and do panels like this and talk about what we did. What we did was we made it possible for them to do their thing. So, I'm happy to answer any questions. I think to those of you who work in homelessness, and it's probably been discussed on this call, I don't have to explain that non-congregate shelter is just so much better for social emotional outcomes and for housing outcomes, that acquisition and rehabilitation is faster and cheaper than any other kind of production of homeless housing. We don't have to explain those things. You understand. And I think from a governor's office or a mayor's office or wherever it is that you're sitting, there's an opportunity now with federal money and political imperative to do things that we never would have been able to do. And I'll tell you, you kind of think, okay, I want to make a proposal to do X, Y, Z. Am I going to get clipped? And you say it out loud. And you're kind of nervous. You're kind of on the water's edge, and you kind of put a proposal out there, and people say, yeah, let's try that. There's an openness right now that hasn't existed. And it's, I think that we're only bounded by our creativity, and we're only bounded by our fear of failure. And, I think there's an opportunity here that's fleeting. And, this time next year, we'll be in a different situation. Short memories here. So let's do as much as we can in the immediate term to do as much as we
Jason,
possibly
in 1 minute, tell us how the governor is seizing the opportunity in terms of his budget for next year.
Oh, so you're asking me to share with this group what we have not yet shared with the state legislature in terms of our homeless budget proposal. Thank you for dangling that bait in front of me. In 2 weeks, the way our budget cycle works is by May 14th, we have to put out our budget proposal. So today is the 29th. So as you can imagine, we're about 2 weeks away from that. So we're in that crunch time right now of trying to make all those decisions. So I can't share in too much specificity, but basically we proposed, we make the way it works is we make an early kind of structural budget proposal in January, and then we make our real budget proposal in May. Our January budget proposal, which was like an indication of where we wanted to go, we proposed $1.75 billion for Homekey. Everything from rehab of motels all the way through acquisition of behavioral health continuum, clinic housing, what we call board and cares, residential care facilities for the elderly. So everything from light intensity to heavy intensity housing, $1.75 billion, and that's all state general fund. Without saying more, we're going to be proposing a larger number in a couple of weeks, significantly larger. And we really want to open the aperture of what Homekey can fund. Most of the Homekey, not all, but most of the Homekey acquisitions in California at the end of last year were hotels and motels, with some really interesting, notable diversions from hotel motel, but it was mostly hotel motel. I'll just give one very interesting piece of information. So I had a friend who is a good supporter of the governor, works in private equity in San Francisco, gave me a call yesterday and said, hey, I just want to let you know, I was sitting in our board meeting and we have a strategy. My firm is about to embark on a strategy or considering a strategy where we're going to buy up hotels that are probably the hotels that your counties are going to want to buy. So this program is so successful now that you have private equity moving in to basically arbitrage hotels and sell them to us next year. That's where we're at in California. We're going to run out of hotels pretty soon here, right? Because the market is going to fully price itself. So we need to think about other kinds of real estate beyond hotels and motels, including vacant commercial office spaces like the city of Lompoc in Santa Barbara County did, modular implementations, other kinds of vacant multifamily and single family apartments and houses, other kinds of real estate typology that can be used for the same purpose with the same speed and the same cost effectiveness as hotel motel conversion. So we're going to open that aperture quite a bit. and look at a lot of different other kinds of typologies and do it with hopefully a lot more money. And obviously we need to earn the legislature's support on all of these proposals. So this is not a fait accompli, but this is the proposal that we're going to be making in a couple of weeks.
Jason, thanks so much. It's incredibly helpful. And if there's a relationship between Governor Newsom and Governor Baker, maybe we can facilitate that telephone call. I think
Happy
Governor
to help.
Baker
Yeah.
would love to hear this kind of information. Back to you, Joyce.
So this has been extremely informative. I'm glad that we used the hour this way. However, I know it didn't quite leave time for the questions we had hoped to address. But a couple of things I'd say. I was showing earlier, I have my copy of the Homekey report.
Oh, love
that
it.
All of you had issued, and we will get that out to all of
you have the
those.
black and white version, and the color version looks better.
Yeah, that's my humble printer. We'll get the version out to everyone. Go ahead and send us more questions if you want. I'm saying to the attendees, and we'll do our best to kind of interface and follow up with more resources. I mean, a couple of closing points. It sounds like in order to deal with the rent issue, you have to get pretty creative and bundle a number of different resources. I'm looking at Tom shaking his head. So that was kind of one point I heard. In prep for this, I believe that Tod Lipka had said, actually, none of these were tax credit projects.
Right.
Is that correct? So kind
That's
of
correct.
all of these, and that kind of goes back to what Andy was talking about, like really thinking about this differently than other affordable housing projects, just much simpler and much more streamlined. So those were some critical kind of takeaways I got from this.
Actually, Joyce, one other thing on that. Obviously, the rent is an important thing. And of course, with $5 billion worth of housing choice vouchers being pledged as part of the Recovery Act, there's some hope there to make those matches. Also, HUD-VASH, there'll be another round of HUD-VASH. That's a really good match because ACT rehab money needs to be joined by rent and service money. So to the degree that HUD-VASH is available, and I would say on the service side, you have something to teach us in California. Jason, they have the full waiver. So they can get the money from Medicaid, third-party billing.
Yeah,
we call CSPAC. Yeah.
What is it that you guys have done? Who are you talking to? Who are you friends with? We need some help.
We'll have to connect you with folks from Mass Health for that,
Yeah.
and happy to connect you offline. We're looking for how that's going to continue.
Service dollar side of a hotel.
Doesn't meet all of it, but yes, absolutely is a huge piece. And so on our end, we're looking at through the American Rescue Plan Act, there's $125 million of home dollars coming into our state, going to a lot of different localities. 35 million of it is going directly to, Massachusetts, to our DHCD. So really looking at the opportunities there. There's still ESG CARES Act funding. There are more vouchers coming. So now is really the time. So we are eager to seize this moment. We're at the top of the hour. I thank you again, all of you, for giving your time for this. Has been extremely interesting. And thank you, Philip, for helping to recruit the California Project Homekey team today. Thanks again.
Great. Thanks for having us, Joyce and Mahasa and all. Thank you.